We are just a few weeks away from the end of the 2023-24 OHL regular season as the race for playoff positioning heats up. And this is the last power ranking for the month of February. So let's dive right into it as we take a look at the week that was around the Ontario Hockey League for February 26th. And starting off at number 20 in the power ranking, the Guelph Storm. They have fallen one spot. You kind of have to wonder, is this rock bottom for the Guelph Storm this season? They went 0-1-1 last week. And in their game against the Windsor Spitfires, they were up 5-1 halfway through the hockey game and then fell apart, losing 8-7 in overtime. This Guelph Storm team, we've talked about how offense has been a problem, but they managed to put up 7 goals. So that's an encouraging sign. However, they couldn't keep the puck out of the back of the net. So this is a Guelph Storm team. They're still in a playoff spot, but they have a lot of work to do before the postseason gets underway. The Guelph Storm losing streak now stands at 4 games. They only have 1 win in their last 12 games. So things are pretty rough right now in the Royal City. The Storm, 6th in the Western Conference. They're 8 points ahead of the Sarnia Sting, who sit 9th. So the Sting, they're in striking distance of this Guelph Storm team. I think Guelph still makes the playoffs, but things need to turn around. So despite the struggles, though, Jet Luchenko, he had a good week. He had 3 goals, 2 assists, good for 5 points in the 2 games. They only have 2 games at home this week. They're going to be at home against the Owen Sound Attack and then Saginaw. When you look at the future schedule for the Guelph Storm, 4 of their next 5 games are against the top 3 teams in the Western Conference standings. So it's a pretty rough stretch right now for Guelph, and it doesn't look to be getting any easier. At number 19, it's the Niagara Ice Dogs. They fell another 2 positions this week. It was another tough week for Niagara. They went 0-2, outscored 15-3 in those 2 games. They also gave up the first goal against Kingston just 8 seconds into the game. Not ideal for this young team. They still want to make the playoffs, but I think at this point you're kind of looking at next season. Niagara, they are 8 points or 10 points rather out of that final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference standings. So a lot of work for Niagara. But it was fascinating after the game against the Kingston Frontenacs. Head coach Ben Boudreau quoted after the game. He says that he feels like he's riding a donkey in a thoroughbred race right now. I don't know if that's a great way to describe your players, but that's what Boudreau is quoted as saying after the loss to the Kingston Frontenacs. I really do hope things can turn around for Niagara. They've missed the playoffs now. They haven't been in the postseason since 2019, so quite the drought in St. Catharines when it comes to playoff hockey, and you just got to hope that this team can turn it around because they have an amazing fan base, the Niagara Ice Dogs do, and you don't want to see that wasted. For Niagara, they host Ottawa Thursday before traveling to Barrie and North Bay. At number 18, the Peterborough Petes, no change for them. They went through Northern Ontario, and it has not been easy for anyone, as the Petes found out. They forced overtime, though, against the Sudbury Wolves before losing to the Greyhounds. So they did get a point out of the 2 games. This is a team that's putting its best foot forward. Peterborough, they're fighting for positioning for next year. I think it's safe to say that they're looking towards the future. But they're not making things easy. They are 8 points out of the final playoff spot in the East, so there's still that mathematical chance the Petes could make the playoffs. We'll have to wait and see. And you also have to give credit to Zach Bowen. He had a pretty good game against the Sudbury Wolves. He faced 48 shots in the overtime loss, giving up 3 goals in that game. Next up for Peterborough, they host the Erie Otters before traveling to Owen Sound. So a little bit of a quieter week for them. At number 17, it's the Barrie Colts. They're up 3 spots. It was a good week for the Colts. They went 2-1, and that includes a 4-3 win in overtime on the road against the Owen Sound Attack. They've had a lot of struggles away from the Saddle Arena, so good to see that effort against their Highway 26 rivals. Cole Bodwin, his point streak came to an end Saturday night at 16 games. Riley Patterson, though, he now has 24 goals on the season, which is tops amongst rookies for goal scoring, so maybe Rookie of the Year honors on the way for Riley Patterson. We'll have to wait and see. The Colts, they do play a big game in Sudbury Wednesday night, and it's a bigger game than usual because of the bounty controversy that came out last week. Sounds like we should hear something from the league between now and Wednesday. I'm sure for a lot of fans, they're going to be wanting to keep a close watch on what happens between the Barrie Colts and the Sudbury Wolves, and the league. they did say it did come out that they are investigating the alleged bounty situation, and we should hear something from the league soon. I would hope. You don't really want to have this lingering over these last few weeks of the regular season, especially if these two teams potentially meet in the first round of the playoffs. Just think of the storylines we could be looking at the postseason. So after the Wednesday game in Sudbury, the Barrie Colts, they do host Niagara on Saturday. At number 16, it's the Erie Otters. No change for them. The Otters, though, they got a big win over the Guelph Storm, but they couldn't keep that momentum going against Kingston. The Otters 2-7-0-1 over their last 10. They need points to stay above the playoff line. Just 5 points ahead of Sarnia right now. And this is a team, their playoff drought goes back to 2017. So Erie really wanting to make the playoffs this year. The Otters, they travel through the East Division this weekend with stops in Peterborough, Kingston, and Ottawa. Number 15, it's the Sarnia Sting. No change for them. After a very tough 7-3 loss in Kitchener, the Sting, they pulled off the come-from-behind victory over the North Bay Battalion on Sunday, and that's why you can't count out the Sting team just yet. This team, they're young, dealing with some key injuries. Kai Schwint missed the last game, but they're staying competitive. Sarnia, 2 points back of Flint, 5 back of Erie, and 8 back of Guelph. So the playoffs not out of the question yet here for the Sting. They do travel north this weekend, which is going to be very challenging. They make stops in North Bay, Sudbury, and Sault Ste. Marie. So not an easy road trip coming up for Sarnia. At number 14, it's the Windsor Spitfires. They fell one position. The playoffs, they do seem very unlikely for the Spitfires, but they're not giving up. They went 1-1 last week. That included overcoming a 5-1 deficit on the road in Guelph for an overtime victory. Windsor, 9 points out of the final playoff spot, 12 games to go. They do have a crucial home-and-home series coming up this week against the Flint Firebirds. This could seal Windsor's fate. If they don't get the 2 wins, then it might be too much for them, too much of a hill for them to climb out of. But could you imagine if Windsor sweeps that series against the Flint Firebirds? Now you're looking at a 5-point race between them and the 8th-seeded Firebirds. Obviously, Sarnia, they've been on a roll, but they've got that tough road trip coming up. So if Windsor can have a good week, there's that chance they could make the playoffs. After the home-and-home with the Flint Firebirds, they do wrap things up at home against Mississauga. At number 13, the Flint Firebirds, they fell 3 positions. Flint, they've just been up and down in the power rankings these last few weeks. Last week, they were 0-3. It's been on again, off again for the Firebirds. They're just 2 points up on Sarnia for that final playoff spot. For the week coming up, they have that crucial home-and-home, as we already mentioned, against the Windsor Spitfires. And then they take on London on Saturday. So a very challenging week ahead for the Firebirds, which could make that playoff race, the bottom of the Western Conference standings, that much more fascinating. At number 12, we have the Owen Sound Attack. They dropped 1 position. The Attack 1-0-1 last week, so a bit of an improvement from the week before. They've moved ahead of Guelph in the Western Conference standings as they now hold that 6th seed. It's the 5th seed. My math is a little off. But anyways, the Owen Sound Attack, they've moved ahead of Guelph. Both Landon Hookey and Ethan Burrows, they scored a pair of goals in the win against Windsor, which is encouraging for this team because they're going to need all hands on deck for these last few weeks. They're going to need that depth scoring, and when you get Hookey and Burrows contributing, along with Colby Barlow and Denny Gore and Cedric Gendon, this Owen Sound Attack team should be pretty challenging in the Western Conference playoff picture. So for Owen Sound, they play a 3-3 this week, starts in Guelph Friday night before hosting Saginaw and Peterborough. At number 11, the Mississauga Steelheads, they are up 1 position, and the Steelheads, they've clinched a playoff spot in the East after they went 2-1 last week. They did play a 3-3, started off with a 7-2 win over the Niagara Ice Dogs, and in that game, Angus McDonnell was issued an unsportsmanlike penalty. That resulted in a 2-game suspension. I know a lot of people were scratching their heads as to what exactly the suspension was. I did some digging and even talked to some of the broadcasters with the Steelheads. They weren't really 100% sure where the suspension came from, but he served the 2 games. He'll be back in the lineup. And not having McDonnell really showed in the game against the Barrie Colts on Saturday where they lost 4-1. But they managed to hold off the Sudbury Wolves yesterday. So this is a Steelheads team. They're young, but they've got a great offense. They can get the job done. They got good goaltending with Ryerson Leanders. Mississauga right now 5th in the East. They still have a good chance of securing home ice advantage in the first round of the playoffs. And for Mississauga, they host Ottawa on Friday before traveling to Windsor. At number 10, we have the Kingston Frontenacs. They are up 4 positions. The Frontenacs, the biggest mover of the week on the power rankings after going 2-1. Their one loss, that was against the London Knights. And let's be honest, everyone besides the Sioux Greyhounds have been having issues with the London Knights. The Frontenacs, they also had their dad trip, which was pretty cool. They won both the games in Niagara and Erie. Yes, those are two struggling teams that you should win, but they got the points. They got 4 points on their 2-game road trip, which is a good sign. And they also scored early in both of those games, which is also very encouraging for Kingston. The Frontenacs are now 9 points ahead of the Barrie Colts. So as long as they don't take their foot off the gas pedal, they should fall no lower than 7th in the East. That's how it's looking right now. The Frontenacs, they do play a 3-3 this weekend. They're first at home to Erie before visiting Brantford and Kitchener. At number 9, we have the North Bay Battalion. No change for them. With the way the week started, I thought the Battalion, they'd be looking at a top 5 appearance in the power ranking. They won in Saginaw 6-3, and then they held on to a 3-2 win over Flint before falling to the Sarnia Sting. They had a 4-2 lead early in the third period, and Sarnia came back to win that one. I think this Battalion team, they will get back on track. This is a very strong team in the Central. 4 points back of Sudbury for first place in the division, so anything is still possible for North Bay. Anthony Romani, he's fallen out of top spot in the scoring race. He was passed by David Goyette, which just adds more to that rivalry between North Bay and Sudbury. The Battalion, they play 2 at home this week against Sarnia and Niagara. At number 8, we have the Kitchener Rangers. They fell 1 spot. The Rangers went 1-1 last week. They've had a loss up in Sault Ste. Marie by a final score of 3-0. Tough loss for them, but you kind of have to wonder about the schedule because Kitchener played at home Friday to Sarnia, and then they had to play an afternoon game in Sault Ste. Marie on Sunday. So a 1-game trip up to the Sioux from Kitchener, that is a long bus ride, but you have to play the games that you're given on the schedule. You can't use it as an excuse, and I'm sure for Hocus and the coaching staff for the Kitchener Rangers, they don't want to use that as an excuse, but you have to wonder if that was a factor in that game. We've also saw London, they've done that as well this year, where they've had a one-off in Sault Ste. Marie, and the Knights, they ended up losing that game back in December. So travel to the Sioux it can be a challenge, but that's what home ice advantage is all about, and the Greyhounds capitalized on their situation, and a win's a win. The Rangers, they do play 2 at home this week. First, they play London Friday night. That's going to be a big game at the Odd. And then they face off against Kingston. At number 7, the Brantford Bulldogs, they're up 1 position. Brantford 1-0-1 on their Michigan road trip, and they nearly swept the trip. They had a 3-2 lead going into the third period against the Saginaw Spirit. And I feel like Brantford, they should be higher in the power rankings, especially since they're first in the Eastern Conference and riding a 7-game point streak. But it's just hard to crack the top 5 right now. And this is a very good Brantford Bulldogs team, as we saw in the game against the Saginaw Spirit, where they ended up losing in overtime. But for the Bulldogs, they'll continue to move up this power rankings with this play. Merrick Van Acker, 5 points in the 2 games, including a hat trick against the Saginaw Spirit. They're also missing some key players still due to injury. So just imagine what this team is capable of if they were fully healthy. We'll have to wait and see what happens here between now and the playoffs, but I do like the look of this Brantford Bulldogs team. The Bulldogs, they do get another chance against Saginaw at home on Friday before hosting Kingston. At number 6, the Saginaw Spirit, no change for them. The Spirit 2-1 last week, but they needed late heroics to take the overtime win against Brantford. Zane Parekh, he was the overtime hero in that one. Now 28 goals on the season for the defenseman as he's rewriting the history books with the Saginaw Spirit when it comes to a defenseman. Saginaw, they are 8-2 over their last 10 games. They're 4 points up on the Sioux Greyhounds for top spot in the West Division. So they will likely make their way back up to the top 3, I would imagine, in this power rankings very shortly, depending on how this road trip comes up for them. It's a busy weekend for them. They're playing 3 in a row on the road. It starts in Brantford Friday. Then they make stops in Owen Sound and Guelph. At number 5, the Sudbury Wolves, they fell 1 position this week. With the news coming out last week about the bounty being put on Colts defenseman Kayshawn Aitchison, it'll be very interesting to see how the Sudbury Wolves team moves forward. They went 1-1 last week, and the goal scoring has fallen off a bit with Sudbury. They needed a third period comeback to defeat the Peterborough Petes in overtime by a final score of 3-2. and they just fell short against Mississauga on the road yesterday. Good news, though, David Gaillet now leads the OHL in scoring with 94 points. He had 2 goals, 2 assists in the 2 games last week, so David Gaillet continues to get it done. And all eyes will be on the Sudbury Wolves Wednesday night as they host the Barrie Colts. And as I mentioned earlier, they're still waiting. We're still waiting for official word from the OHL as to what's coming next in regards to this bounty situation. Fascinating stuff, considering that Sudbury and Barrie have 3 more games to go for the end of the regular season. So after the game Wednesday night against Barrie, the Sudbury Wolves, they'll host Sarnia and Oshawa. At number 4, it's the Oshawa Generals. They fell 1 position. The Generals, they went 1-1 last week, so pretty average. But if this keeps up, they could be seeing a serious drop here in the power rankings. Jacob Oster, though, continues to be solid in net for the Generals. He's second in goals against average at .289, and his save percentage of .904 is 4th best in the OHL. And this is going to be a very challenging week for Oshawa. They start on the road Wednesday night in London before traveling to the Sioux and Sudbury. So 3 very tough teams, and you have to play in all 3 of their barns. So not an easy week here for Oshawa. At number 3, it's the Ottawa 67s. They're up 2 spots this week. Ottawa went 1-0-1, and they put a great fight up against London at home. They ended up losing in the shootout, so they nearly got the victory against London. That's something not many teams have been able to do this year. The 67s, they've been very impressive of late. They're riding a 4-game point streak, and they have a record of 6-2-1-1 over their last 10. So the 67s, they're getting points. They're climbing back up the standings, trying to challenge Brantford for top spot in the East Division. Ottawa, they will likely clinch a playoff spot this week. They have 3 games coming up. First, they're in Niagara and Mississauga before returning home to face Erie. At number 2, it's the Sioux Greyhounds. No change for them. They were a perfect 2-0 last week, including a 3-0 shutout of the Kitchener Rangers. The Greyhounds trying to close the gap on Saginaw in the West Division. Right now, 4 points out of first. Charlie Schenkel, I don't think he gets enough attention for what he's been doing in net for the Sioux Greyhounds. He has a record of 25-11-2 and now 2 shutouts on this season. So I know that we focus a lot on the offense that this Greyhounds team has, but also their goaltending. Schenkel, he's been doing a really good job between the pipes there for the Sioux Greyhounds. And this is a very dangerous team in the West, and they play 2 games at home this week against Oshawa and Sarnia. So that leaves us with the number 1 team in the power rankings. And for the 8th week in a row, it's the London Knights. No change for them. They went 2-0 last week, but the Ottawa 67s gave them some problems there at the nation's capital where they needed a shootout and a comeback to win. The Knights, only 1 regulation loss in their last 28 games. That is unreal. Also, Toronto Maple Leafs prospect Easton Cowan, he's riding a 25-game point streak, which is a franchise record for this London Knights organization. Everything is going right, it seems, for the London Knights. Even if they get a player out of the lineup due to suspension or injury or whatnot, it's basically a next man up mentality is what they're doing, and it's paying off. Dale Hunter's got this team playing the systems right, and we'll see if this momentum will continue the rest of the regular season. The Knights, they do play at home Wednesday against Oshawa before going to Kitchener and Flint, and if they can record 3 wins, especially a win against the Kitchener Rangers Friday night, then the London Knights will clinch the Midwest Division. So it's an unreal run. They were double-digit points behind Kitchener at about the halfway point of the regular season. And then they put on this impressive point streak, and now here they are with a sizable lead in the Midwest Division, ready to clinch it at the start of March. So it's pretty incredible what the London Knights have been able to do. And we'll see if that momentum will continue. You know that's going to be a huge game at the Odd on Fridays. The Rangers are going to want to show them that they're no pushovers after what happened a few weeks ago. So that's the power rankings for this week. Let me know in the comments section down below your thoughts on the rankings or events that have taken place over the last week. The channel, it's been growing steadily, and I thank you so much for your support. If you're newly subscribed, thanks for joining. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I know we've got a lot of people who return to see these videos, especially the power rankings. Feel free to hit subscribe to let us know that you're tuning in and from where. And again, thank you very much for all your support. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon.